Greatest common factor is another example in math where we are trying to find a relationship between two numbers. So greatest common factor simply means the largest number that is a factor of the two numbers. And remember that a factor means that it is a number that we use to multiply. So for example, for the number 2, it has factors of 1 and 2 because 1 times 2 equals 2. So when we're trying to find the greatest common factor, there's two different methods that I have found, and it's always important to choose the method that makes the most sense to you, while also remembering that knowing multiple methods can help you solve problems because sometimes one method is better than another. So in this case, we're going to do what I call the factor method, and we have the numbers 20 and 35. So the factor method means that we are going to list out every number that's a factor of each number. So when I do this, I do them in pairs and I try to get them in order. So for example, with 20, 1 times 20, and then I just work my way into the middle. So after 1 times 20, we would have 2 and 10. 3 is not a factor of 20, 4 is a factor of 20, and then 5. So the factors of 20 are 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. So now I have a list of every number that's a factor, and now I'm going to repeat the process with 35. So I have 1 times 35. 2 is not a factor of 35. 3 is not a factor of 35. 4 is not a factor of 35. And 5 and 7. So we can see that 35 does not have as many factors as 20 does. So when I'm doing this, there are divisibility rules that can make this a lot easier. So for example, if a number is even, I know that it's divisible by 2. And if a number is not even, then that means that every other even number is also not going to be a factor. So they're just little rules that you can learn that are going to make life easier. So when I compare these two lists, I'm just going to start at either end. So I would start at the beginning. 1 is a common factor. 2 is not a common factor. 4 is not a common factor. 5 is a common factor. 10 is not a common factor. 20 is not a common factor. 35 is not a common factor. So we can see in this case that our GCF, or greatest common factor, would be 5. So that is the biggest number that is a factor of both 20 and 35. So now that we know this solution type, let's try another one real quick. So this is called the prime factorization method, which means we're going to break it down to its prime factors. So the numbers that are only multiples multiplied by themselves and 1. That's a prime number. So we already know that both 20 and 35 are not prime numbers because they have more factors than themselves and 1. So for prime factorization, a common strategy is to make a factor tree. And we can make more than one kind of factor tree. So if you can't think of a number, then we can start with the smallest one. Like we have 2 times 10, and then 10 would be 2 times 5. You can also do a factor tree and with different starting points. So I could also start with 4 times 5 and then break down 2 and 2. So my prime factorization, no matter which way I do it, is going to be 2, 2, and 5. For 35, and we never use 1 times itself. So 35, the only factorization I have is 5 times 7, which means that its prime factorization is 5 and 7. So with prime factorization, then we look and we just put together all of the multiples or all of the factors that are the same. So in this case, the only factor that's the same is 5. But if there were more than one factor in common, we would just multiply those back together in order for us to get our greatest common factor. So to show you what that would look like, I have two that have multiple prime numbers in common. So 24 would make a factor tree, and I'm just going to go with 4 and 6. 4 breaks down to 2 and 2. 6 breaks down to 2 and 3. So my prime factors here are 2, 2, 2, and 3. For 36, I've got 6 and 6, which breaks down to 2 and 3, and 2 and 3. So its prime factors are 2, 2, 3, 3. So what we have in common is I have this 2 matches with this 2 matches with this 2, and this 3 matches with this 3. So my greatest common factor is going to be 2 times 2 times 3, which would be 4 times 3, which means that my greatest common factor is 12. So that's showing how we would put our prime factors together. So the last thing that I want to mention is that if we are comparing two different things, so here we have factors, which would be 1, 2, and 4, and 19 only has factors of 1 and 19 because it's a prime number. If I was doing a tree, it would be 2 and 2, and then 19 doesn't really have any. So in this case, the greatest common factor would be 1, because that's the only factor that they have in common. And so that is how we find the greatest common factor.